me a thumbs. Oh, I see it. Ready? Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jenny Gordon, and I'm here to do this wonderful student advocate panel. And I just want to give you all a reminder that the chat box is available and anyone can utilize it at any time. If you do wish to, make sure that you use the chat box versus the Zoom chat box. So the Attendee Hub chat box, please. I just want to share with you, I'm the First Lady of Wyoming and I work in food insecurity. I have the Wyoming Hunger Initiative, which we launched in 2019. And I wanted to work in that space in food insecurity because both of my parents came from very food insecure backgrounds. I have 9 brothers and sisters. We always had enough to eat, but both of my parents grew up on either side of the Atlantic Ocean in poverty. My father was a Depression-era child of 10. Both of his parents lost their family home due to illness. They were homeless with many children, and my dad had to go out on his own at 14 to provide for himself. My mother lived in war-torn Europe, in Vienna, Austria. They were occupied in 1938 by the Germans, and then subsequently after the war by the Russians, and never had enough to eat until she came to the United States in 1950. So while we were growing up, we knew that we never should waste anything. We should be grateful for everything we had, but also that we should give back if we were in a position to help others that were in those circumstances. So I honor my parents with this work, and it is something that I feel Wyoming has done in many different ways because we are a very small populated state. We're large geographically, but oftentimes you have to drive far distances to get to grocery stores or to find food sustenance. So it's a way to give back. The Wyoming Hunger Initiative never reinvents the wheel. We always work with the agencies on the ground that are doing great work in their own communities because boots on the ground know how to serve their communities best. And we also are in all 23 counties in Wyoming. So while it seems like it's a heavy lift, we've been able to really network people and get them together and provide for those that are in need. So I'm really happy to be here to share that story, but also to hear some of the great work that our young panelists have done, and just really proud to know them. Obviously, Loudon, who's one of our student advocates from Wyoming. I have done work with him. It's been a wonderful group. And then Hannah is a new person to me, so I'll do a little introduction. Hannah San is a first-generation college student at the University of Washington in Seattle, where she's pursuing a major in public health, global health, and a career in childhood trauma prevention, anti-poverty, and anti-violence. Hannah was raised by working class Chinese Vietnamese immigrant refugee parents in Bellingham, Washington. We also have Loudon. He is a 16-year-old junior and student body president at Lingle Fort Laramie High School. He found success in state championship livestock evaluation honors in FFA and in 3 different sports. He also raises and sells commercial cattle and show pigs for local and national exhibition. And finally, we have Roy, I'm going to try to say this right, Krobinzinski. He is the managing director of the Federal Domestic Policy for Save the Children, overseeing work on child nutrition and early childhood education. Prior to this role, he lobbied on manufacturing and research and development policy and served as a legislative assistant on Capitol Hill. He handled a wide variety of issues, including education and science and technology policy. So we have just a great panel here, and we'll go ahead and just get started. Let's start with Hannah. If you could tell me a little bit about yourself and your community and share with us what SNAP has meant for you and your community. But before we start with you, Hannah, I might share a few facts about Wyoming and SNAP here. So just a little bit, we are a state of about 500,000 people. We have about 14,500 households on SNAP here, which covers about 30,900 individuals. The average monthly payment for SNAP for a family is $364 here in Wyoming. For households, and $177 for individuals. About 40% of the households have children that are receiving these benefits. And how it applies to our school lunch is really important here in the state. The fact that we can direct certify those kids that are on SNAP for free or reduced lunch has helped tremendously with the paperwork. And that's one thing. Wyoming has a very high school lunch debt in our state, about $200,000 a year. So this is really important to have that direct certification. So just a little overview of SNAP here in Wyoming. So now we can get back to Hannah. So Hannah, if you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your community and share with us what SNAP has meant for you and your community.
So, hi everyone, I'm Hannah, and I grew up in Bellingham, Washington, which is predominantly rural. And at the high school that I attended, about 1/3 of the student population were economically disadvantaged and heavily relied on free and reduced lunch, including me and my sisters throughout preschool and high school. And my family, we nearly became ineligible more than once because we were just one notch above the poverty line. But that was only because of how hard my parents worked to help my family survive and to put food on the table. And we didn't know that we had access to SNAP benefits. And for me, I didn't know about it until health class in high school. And yeah, that's way too far late in my life. And I still struggle a lot with the food scarcity mindset because I realize that's directly linked to food insecurities from my childhood, because our level of food availability, it was always fluctuating, and it led us to restrict our food intake when food was scarce, and then we'd compensate by overeating when food was more abundant, and that food wasn't always healthy, and it was just basic survival for us. But then we learned the hard way that binge eating is linked with severe adverse health consequences, including diabetes and heart disease, hypertension, and chronic inflammation. And I've developed a chronic disease very young in my life, and it has impacted me in so many ways. And yeah, it's nutrition related too. And yeah, that's my part that I wanted to say.
Well, thank you, Hannah. Really appreciate that personal touch and sharing your story, which can be very difficult to do. Loudon, do you want to share with us a bit about yourself, your community, and then what SNAP, if anything, has meant for you and your family?
Yes, ma'am. So my name is Loudon Bremer. I'm 16. As Miss Gordon kind of already said this morning, I'm a junior at Lingle Fort Laramie High School, the student body vice president. I'm involved in FFA. I'm a 3-sport athlete. I'm the 6th generation in Goshen County of an agriculturally based family, and the whole community of Goshen County is an agriculturally based community. So we take pride in helping each other out, whether that be helping brand your neighbor's cattle or helping out with food insecurity in our very own school. So I can't speak on SNAP helping with my family. I don't have really enough experience with that program to say anything on that, but that's what I've got for myself. So.
Well, thank you, Loudon. It's been a real honor to hear your story and to know about what you've been doing. It's really inspiring to see young leaders like both of you advocating for food access. Can you highlight a specific project or advocacy initiative that you've been involved with that's had an impact on addressing childhood hunger in your community? And what were your takeaways from that experience? So Hannah, if you could start off for us.
So with my advocacy experiences, I've lobbied in legislative meetings, and I've testified in bill hearings in front of the Senate committee about expanding on free school meals, universal school meals, and also about SNAP benefits. And I've been to Washington, D.C. and Olympia in Washington. But the thing that hit me the hardest was when I've traveled with the Riverways Education Partnerships program. I've been volunteering. It's a University of Washington program collaborating with rural tribal communities throughout Washington state. And where I came from, it is very rural, but these places are even more rural than what I've experienced, because the school buses literally, they go through the mountains and forests to pick kids up and to go to school. And they are food deserts. It takes about an hour and a half of a drive to just buy groceries. Comparatively, within my family, we take about half an hour to drive to get groceries, and then it take another 2 hours of driving for my family to buy culturally appropriate food in Seattle's Chinatown. And we would make an entire trip out of it, like once a month, just to buy lunch and groceries. And comparing to what these rural tribal communities would do, they would do the same thing. And they would drive out and make a whole trip and come back. And they have these giant freezers, these foods. With the education or the Riverways Education Partnerships program, I've worked with the communities to provide rural education. And one of my experiences, I got to live with them in their residential dorms, and I've seen firsthand. They let us use their kitchen, and I just peeked inside their fridge and saw that there was no fresh fruit or vegetables at all, but it was a lot of highly processed foods that are very low in nutrients. And I also, I remember one of the locations that I was at, there was a nearby mini mart that was probably like half an hour away. And even though they were so small and local, they weren't like big companies like Walmart, but they still accepted SNAP benefits. And I was amazed. And that's so important to have. And also at farmers markets too, and which happens a lot in Bellingham, they also accept SNAP. And so, I just wanted to make a point that accessibility and also walkability is so important. I've talked to my cousins in San Francisco, and they weren't aware about their privilege. They didn't realize that having a grocery store of just a 5-minute walk away, that makes things so much more convenient. And they didn't know how much we had to go through back in Bellingham.
Well, thank you, Hannah. You know, I think of rural and I don't think of Washington State. So thank you for sharing that experience with us. How about for you, Loudon? Can you give us a highlight of a specific project or advocacy that you have done addressing childhood hunger?
Yes, ma'am. So I was actually able to be a part of something that was a huge project in our little community. Because many of the COVID initiatives had been terminated at this point, school lunches were no longer free, and we found that as a problem for some of the community families. So it was during an open forum school board meeting. My mom and dad and I, we were sitting in there, and one of our school counselor said that she was paying money out of her own pocket for students' lunches. And so my dad kind of nudged me, and he said, there's plenty of fundraisers for football and basketball and stuff like that. Why don't we, you and the student council, run a super meaningful fundraiser to help kids pay for lunches and kind of alleviate the burden of standing lunch debt. So we got that ball rolling. I was like, yeah, let's get $500 raised, and that'll be something that should be super beneficial to our community. But then later on down the road, we got put into connection with First Lady Jenny Gordon. Because of her hunger initiative, she was able to offer us a $5,000 matching grant if we were to raise $5,000, which was a super generous offer. So that kind of got us kickstarted, and we got the ball rolling, started fundraising really hard. People saw a cause and related to it in our little community, and were super willing to donate to it because it was ultimately beneficial to kids that I sit with every day in the classroom. So we ended up raising almost $12,000, which a big part of it came from Miss Gordon and her hunger initiative, as well as a generous donation from her own funding there. So it was just a super awesome project. It helped alleviate a lot of the school lunch debt. We ultimately wiped away all of the previous year's standing lunch debt at Lingo Fort Laramie High School, middle school, and elementary school. So it was just a super awesome project that I was really blessed to be a part of, and it helped a lot of people. So.
Well, thank you. And it was very impactful to be able to go to the school and to share that day with all of the people involved. So thank you for that work. I have another question. What advice do you have for other young people looking to get involved with food security advocacy in your community? What do you wish you knew first when you got started? So Hannah, if you want to tell us.
So I'm going to treat this question like a letter to myself, because personally, I've struggled immensely with imposter syndrome and also commitment issues. When I was offered more and more opportunities that went far beyond my comfort zone throughout my advocacy journey. So I wanted to read a little bit about what I wrote. I said, if you are passionate about this work because you identify as a childhood trauma survivor and you want to prevent cycles of poverty from repeating, then you are in the right place and you are surrounded by life-changing mentors who are willing to guide you. You are not broken. You did not shatter. You are more adaptive, strong, and resilient than all of your privileged peers combined. You are able to endure far more because you have endured far more. Even if you break down crying in the middle of a legislative meeting or stutter over your words in front of a televised bill hearing, you have to keep going because your story is powerful and your voice matters. You're making political waves because no child deserves to suffer the same way that you and your family did and the generations before you. You have to keep going, even if retelling your story means reliving through trauma every time you tell it. You have to keep going. Even if speaking up means breaking through decades of silence and selective amnesia in your family, you have to keep going. Every time you tell your story, you are making mini legacies everywhere because your story stays within the minds of people, even years after you've told them. The fact that you are here now means that you are going through post-traumatic growth, and we should all celebrate that. You are doing the hardcore work of breaking cycles of trauma and poverty. Always, always remember whose shoulders you stand on and what you stand for.
That's deeply moving and very personal. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important to remember those things. So Loudon, would you like to share with us your advice?
Yeah, so some advice that I would have is just to be proactive. See a problem and don't be afraid to fill a need, and be bold while you're doing it, because it may seem small at first, but if you take it with a head full of steam and you're bold in the way that you want this project to turn out, the project will turn out that way. There's a lot of good to be derived from that. Another super important thing for me is to get a genuine understanding of who you are before you take on a project of any scale, because that makes this project so much more genuine to not only yourself, but to the people you are doing it for. So just understand who you are. That's something super big that I would like to let any young leader or any leader for that matter make sure that they know that. Something that I wish I knew before I got this project started was to kind of just take a step back and see how it was affecting myself and other people in the midst of the project. Even after the dust settled, I still wasn't quite sure the impact that this project had on so many people, because I was just focused on what was happening, not necessarily what it was doing. So I wish I would have just taken a step back and taken it all in during the fact. So.
Thanks, Loudon. And that's great advice for any leader, regardless of how old you are. So it's great that you learned it early. So my next question is, what advice do you have for food security organizations that want to amplify the voices of youth leaders like yourselves? And how can they support work like yours? So Hannah?
So I have two major things. Number one is to unlearn your internalized adultism. Unlearn your implicit bias that young people are weak, helpless, less intelligent, and less important than adults. So this is actually a specific form of ageism, and which is a specific form of oppression and discrimination, and it's called adultism. So if you're mentoring youth ambassadors, you need to recognize your power dynamics and resist dismissing or minimalizing the opinions, knowledge, culture, and life experiences of young people simply because they are young. And speaking about respecting us, pay us, like seriously compensate us for our time. Because while it's great that nonprofits, they're starting to pay attention to youth empowerment in the advocacy world, nonprofits, they are perpetuating cycles of inequity and injustice when you go through the easy, convenient route of recruiting privileged youth from higher income communities with more time and resources. So youth with the most powerful, memorable stories that can mobilize people are the ones who are directly impacted and have ongoing unmet needs, and many of which are preventable by providing financial aid and scholarships. And personally, I find it ironic that I was advocating for hunger relief in Washington state while I was also applying for emergency aid last spring quarter. And that was because I was anticipating a lot of stress over financial insecurity. And I criticize how when I was attending the Save the Children Advocacy Summit this summer, I was surrounded by privileged student ambassadors everywhere. And I was wondering, where are my fellow low-income first-generation students who are survivors of childhood hunger? This is why representation really matters, and it makes it so important to create pathways for diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. So to summarize, self-empowerment comes from financial empowerment, and we need to ensure that youth leadership opportunities are available to all students, especially students whose voices often go unheard.
Well, thank you for that powerful answer that hopefully we can all gain a little bit of thought and information from. Loudon, the same question for you.
Yes, ma'am. So some advice that I would give food security organizations: advocate and work to tell our stories. People in your community that are doing stuff that ultimately are helping the same common goal that you are working for, reach out and make partnerships with them. Advocate for their work, advertise their work. That's something that's super big. Telling a story. When you tell a story of what's being done, people find it as more genuine, and they find it as a common cause that they're more liable to get behind. So it's super important that they advocate for other things that are going on in their community. I think there's two opportunities that these organizations have to do that. Number one, we talked to our local food bank director over lunch before this summit, and he said that they really had trouble finding volunteer help to do the things that they wished they could in their organization. However, if this would have been made known, student leadership groups in our school, not only student council, but National Honor Society, FFA, would have been more than happy to volunteer and help with these organizations. So that's an opportunity to help organizations help other people, and young leaders help those organizations. The second opportunity being they could look for efforts in the community to help. I kind of already touched on this one. But for example, if they would have gone behind our fundraiser, maybe pushed it out more to people that they already have a network with, this conversation would have spread wider. We could have got more people to get behind us and help us out a little bit more in that regard, in terms of some financial help, and even just getting our story out there. So I think creating partnerships, advocating for work of other organizations that aren't necessarily yours, but are going for the same common goal. Those are two things that I think are super important, would be beneficial if food organizations, security organizations could help out with. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Loudon. Such great reminders as well. Our next question is, many young leaders face challenges when trying to engage with policymakers and affect change at a systematic level. Can you share some strategies or success stories about how you've been able to influence decision makers in your community? And we're going to start with you this time, Loudon.
Awesome. Thanks. So some imperative and crucial aspects to the success in my project was building relationships, not just relationships with the people in my community, but relationships on a larger scale. For example, with administrators in my school, with the school board, with First Lady Jenny Gordon. That was something that was super important and was big in influencing ultimately the trajectory of my project. Becoming aware of policies and systems that are already in place, as Ms. Gordon kind of touched on earlier in this summit, not reinventing the wheel. If those policies are already in place, sure, start conversations to maybe better those policies, but don't try to reword something because the policy more than likely might already be in place. That's not to discourage from looking for new and improved ideas, but ultimately don't try to reinvent the wheel. A huge thing for me was partnering with an adult that wanted to help me succeed. It is tough at a young age. I would agree that sometimes you don't necessarily get the respect that you would expect from adults, but at the same time, it's not a barrier if you have an adult with you along the way that's willing to help you out. My student council advisor, Mrs. Estes, has played a huge role in that. So getting an adult that wants to help you out, and then I don't know if I would call it a success story, but just kind of another piece of information for maybe any other rural communities across America that might be on here listening. The accessibility in rural America to policymakers is ultimately a huge and awesome opportunity because of the access that you have to them. For example, one afternoon I met with First Lady Miss Jenny Gordon, and then we went down the street and had a meeting with our state legislators and senators, and were invited to create a bill if we were interested in that by our local legislators. So rural communities, ultimately those people representing you are people you could walk down the street and talk to. So I would encourage those conversations if you're looking to be an advocate for something. So super cool opportunities in rural communities. And if you wanted to make it an opportunity in any other community, I think you could certainly do so.
Well, thank you. And that is so true. I think sometimes we don't realize the access that we can have with those policymakers and legislators. So thank you, Loudon. Hannah, same question for you.
So I have two notes of advice depending on how you identify. So if you're not a survivor of childhood hunger, nor are you a descendant of intergenerational child malnutrition, then this should go without saying that you should pass the mic to someone who does have personal and family experiences with food insecurity, and to support them with your entire being. We need to resist and avoid the savior complex because it's harmful and it perpetuates injustice. Instead, you need to think broadly on structural socioeconomic issues and focus more on researching the facts and statistics, which could be just as powerful and effective to influence decision makers. You need to be willing to not be at the center of the work and to follow the advice, the expertise, and the request of people who are closest to the pain and the problem. Meanwhile, for those who do identify with me as fellow survivors of childhood hunger, when trying to engage with policymakers, you need to hit them right in the feels. And before then, when you're preparing for an advocacy session, you should give yourself the time, peace, silence, and slowness in order to be in the right headspace to craft your impact story and to organize your thoughts and to document them. And this is especially important because eventually you would be able to create a long-running archive, and it would make it easier and easier to craft an impact story that is powerful and memorable on the spot. And that's how I personally survived lobby days with little to no prep the day before. And I'm literally drafting my story right up to the last minute before the legislative meeting. And I'm just pulling together pieces of my memoir and personal essays that I've written and collected and I refined over the years. And at that point, I'm just focusing on new ways to pitch it with the intention of getting an emotional reaction from people, because while they don't remember the specific details of your story, they will always remember how you made them feel.
That is so true, Hannah. I really, really appreciate your deeply personal story that you've shared. Thank you, Loudon, for your story. I think it's so important for people to hear, young people who are working on these issues, because that is the future leaders of our nation are right here and helping us to understand that. So now I'm going to introduce you to Roy Krobinski. Roy is going to talk to us about the Farm Bill and SNAP, and then we'll have some follow-up question and answer sessions. So take it away, Roy.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists for sharing their stories. As Hannah just said, sharing your story, hitting lawmakers in the fields. As a former Hill staffer, those were the meetings that stuck with me. I can look up the policy information, I can look up the statistics. But being able to take that personal story back to the member of Congress to tell them this is the impact that supporting this program can make to the people you represent, that's what motivates a staffer. At least that's what motivated me to make that case to my boss to get him to vote for something or support something. And everybody has that story to tell. All of you who decided to take the time to join today, you have a story to share. And that can be really meaningful, especially in the ongoing debate around the Farm Bill. And so just a quick overview, the Farm Bill is legislation that authorizes almost all the food and agriculture programs here in the US and around the world. But in the US, 9 million children face hunger. This number went up during the pandemic. We've been able, through a number of interventions and programs, been able to get that number back down slightly. But 9 million children in the US is still an extremely large number. And as Hannah and Loudon were talking about, there are programs to assist these kids. We know what works. It's about the government making the investments that are necessary. And one of those programs is SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. 42 million Americans utilize the SNAP program, and half of them, about 20 million, are our children. And so there's a lot that Congress at the federal level can do to make sure that these families, these children, have access to the nutrition that they need. So if we can go to the next slide. So what do you need to tell Congress to do? What are the asks? And it's pretty straightforward. Next slide. protect and strengthen SNAP in the Farm Bill. There are a lot of other policy nuance details that I could get into, but we'll keep it top line. You can go to the website here. You can go to savethechildren.org. You can go to No Kid Hungry's website, and you will find a ton of information on the Farm Bill, on SNAP. There are pre-drafted emails that you can just really click and send to your lawmaker to help advocate for the importance of SNAP in the Farm Bill, but also for a variety of other issues in the Farm Bill. Again, didn't want to overwhelm folks. The basic idea here is protect and strengthen SNAP. Make sure people have the resources they need to afford food. Right now, the average SNAP benefit is $6 per person per day. $6 a day. That's one meal maybe at a grocery store. That is not breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack. That is not getting you through your day. And so the idea that is enough to feed folks is just Congress needs to do more. They need to protect SNAP benefits, and in a perfect world, they would do more to strengthen them. And so you can send an email. That's the basic thing you can do, but you can call them. You can call them and ask for a meeting. Send an email to the staffer for the office and ask them, I want to meet and talk about this issue. And as you again heard from Loudon, heard from Hannah, share your story. Why is this important to you? Why have you taken the time today to be on this conference at this summit? Why is this? There has to be a reason. There has to be something behind this driving you. Share that story and talk to your lawmaker about why this is so important. And there's no better representation. There's no better motivator than hearing what Hannah and Loudon shared with us today.
Okay, well, we have a little bit of time for some questions and answers. And we do have a couple questions, so we'll start with those, but feel free to enter any questions you have in the chat box and we'll get to those as well, provided we have enough time. So the first question is, when you learned about food policies or programs, was there anything that surprised you, and what were they? So let's start with you on that one, Hannah.
So I first learned about a lot of these food programs when I was taking a nutrition course at my university, and we had a unit about food insecurity. And most people thought that SNAP recipients, they receive like maybe $20 per day, but actually a family receives between $5 to $6 per day per family member. And this means that for families who heavily rely on SNAP, they're forced to buy cheap foods that are usually unhealthy and heavily processed, because if they don't, then they could easily run out of money and out of food during the last week of the month, every month. And I remember when I was in legislative meetings I think it was in Washington, D.C. 2 summers ago, I was hearing the impact stories of fellow advocates, and there would be parent advocates who would be telling their story and then suddenly cry and then make the entire room cry with them, because they were telling stories where their child they were forced to pick between one fruit and another instead of having both. It was just not fair to them that they had to make all these decisions, and it really weathers people down and stresses them out.
Thank you, Hannah. Same question for Loudon. When you learned about food policies or programs, was there anything that surprised you, and what were they?
Yes, ma'am. So something that surprised me was how important the SNAP program is to the economy right now. Actually, an article from USDA said that for every dollar circulated into the SNAP program, 80 cents to $1.50 is returned back into the economy. So in a rural setting like we're in, with farmers and ranchers that are producing these goods, this money is ultimately recirculating back into their pockets. And that's something I didn't really look at it in that way. And that's something that's super, that surprised me. There's also a large, significant percentage of people in our community that use SNAP benefits, and it would be a really big deal if they were taken away at this point in time, with the economy and the way it is. And something that also kind of caught my attention, I know Hannah talked about it earlier, just being above the qualifications for qualifying for the SNAP program, what that will do to somebody who is trying to better their conditions. But if they're, say, 10 cents over that line, ultimately their conditions would be worse than if they were still on those SNAP benefits than when they're trying to be progressive and better their situation. So that's something I would encourage some thought on, how we could better find a happy medium, a common ground of where we could kind of balance that out. So those were some things that were kind of jumped out at me and surprised me.
Thank you, Loudon. Hannah, we had an audience question as well. How can advocacy organizations best support youth advocates with lived experiences through frustrating with lawmakers and sometimes slow the pace of change? Can you speak to that?
Sorry, can you say that question again?
How can advocacy organizations best support youth advocates with lived experiences through frustrating experiences with lawmakers and sometimes slow the pace of change?
Yeah, this question, by the way, thank you for asking it, whoever did. It's hard. And there's just speaking about my experience, how I mentioned that I literally be breaking up crying in the legislative meetings, and that happened more than once, and then it's kind of devastating to hear afterwards that the law that I was super passionate in, that I poured my blood, sweat, and tears advocating for, it didn't get passed, or there was adjustments, so they didn't allow for the full investment that we are asking for. And when it comes to that, we just have to keep pushing, even if it means month after month, year after year, because they eventually they do listen to us when they hear us trying so hard. And yeah, we just need to keep being persistent, even if it drains us, but also it's super motivating and powerful to get connected with all these other advocates who have the similar stories or unique stories about the same cause that we're passionate in. Yeah, I don't know if I fully answered that question, but that's my answer.
Well, thank you, Hannah. That is very important information, very powerful information. So thank you. The next audience question is for Loudon. It says, for a state like Wyoming, and I can help you on this, Loudon, if you'd like. For a state like Wyoming, where the majority are living in highly rural areas, is the food insecurity more so due to their location being remote, or is it because of poverty? And how do you implement local food pantries or food banks there?
So I'll kind of give my 2 cents on it, and then I'll hand it over to the expert. We are a kind of a remote state, but that is not, I wouldn't say isn't a huge problem for people as far as getting resources. I would say it has more to do with poverty, just in kind of the little experience that I have with learning about this. We food pantries are working to connect with local farmers and ranchers and use the resources that they have. So that's something they're working on too. And I know Miss Gordon has a lot more to say on that. So I'll hand it over to her.
Well, I think you did a great job, because I know this is not something, I mean, when you first started, what you were working on, so you've learned so much. I would agree with you. Wyoming is a very boom and bust economy. When things are going well in the mineral extraction industry, people have high paying jobs and things flow pretty easily. But we also have a lot of poverty due to people who are working in maybe service jobs where the pay is not really high enough for them to be able to live without being in poverty. So it really is just being aware of what is going on. We have a lot of mobile food pantries that are being distributed around the state through Food Bank of Wyoming. And if people have a specific need, if there's a layoff, say at one of the mines, or some business is laying off people, they can come in very quickly and bring food to those folks. But it really is, I think that, Hannah addressed it, just the stigma associated with it can be a barrier. And sometimes people maybe have judgments that are not accurate, but unfortunately that happens. So I think it's just really us telling the story, making people aware, and making it, safe to go and get help when you need it. And then if you're in a position to help out others, then you help them out. So that's a great question from the audience. Thank you for that as well. We might be close to our time, so I don't have any other questions. If someone wants to wrap us up, that would be great. And maybe
I'll jump in real quick. Sorry.
Oh, no, good.
Just to speak to Hannah's the question to Hannah about the pace of lawmakers. Anyone who follows Congress, or even just a little bit, can see that things are kind of a mess right now. The House can't pick a speaker. The Senate is not always in session. When I was on the Hill, and this was a long time ago, it took an average of 9 years for a bill to go from introduction to passage. Something like the Farm Bill has to be done every 5 years, and so there are these moments where Congress does have to act. And so there are opportunities, despite how it may feel sometimes, where Congress does get stuff done, and those are the moments where you need to raise your voice. And so as Hannah said, hearing stories like hers, those are the things that keeps me, who on a daily basis is paying attention to Congress and what they're doing. It's Hannah's story, it's Loudon's story about their experiences that keeps me motivated. And it is building that community. You're not alone in advocacy. There are, whether or not you see it, there are other people, there are other groups, there are other advocates out there with the same kind of stories pushing as well. And so you're never alone in this fight. And so it's helpful for summits like this, for moments like this, to build that sense of community and understand that there are lots of people pushing in the same direction. But it's really upon us to keep using our voice as best we can, as often as we can, to make sure that our lawmakers, state, federal, local, are doing what we need to make sure that children, families, adults are fed and have access to the food that they need. Loud.
I have a question for you if we kind of have time. So we were talking about community and bringing it back to community and using our voices to tell our stories and things like that. I acknowledge how important the SNAP program is and how important the Farm Bill is, and 9 million kids that are facing hunger is a very large number. But kind of going back to my project, it was started in the community and it stayed in the community. I'm wondering what you think about of a grassroots movement, more or less, where it comes. Do you think this problem is too large scale to kind of alleviate with strictly a grassroots movement, or what do you think would be a balance of government interference and doing the best we can to maybe try to get it back to the church or other affiliations that would be willing to help?
a really good question. You're going to put me in a tight political bind here. I mean, overall, I would say it's all the above, right? I mean, no one group is going to be able to solve something like this. You're talking 42 million people across the U.S., 9 million children. They're in urban areas, they're in rural areas, they're in suburban areas. They all have access to different levels of resources. Hannah talked about people living 5 minutes from a grocery store where other people have to drive an hour. And so a community, no matter how much effort and work they put in, yeah, they can establish a food pantry, but they can't necessarily incentivize a supermarket to come closer to where they live. And so it takes investment and a strategic plan at all levels of government, to make these things happen. It's great to start it at the community level, but it can't end there. You need that state level investment. You need that federal investment to keep things moving along, because sometimes there are not enough resources to go around, and so making sure that you have the federal grant to support the local investment, similar to what First Lady Gordon did for you. Here's a matching grant. If you can get this community investment, we have this state level investment, and so providing those matching funds and kind of building off of each other, it really is the most impactful and successful way to make these kind of things happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, giving me a kind of a new perspective on a balance between community and the government. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Roy. That is amazing information. And I think we can all build from there, that it is all hands on deck approach. So appreciate that. All right. Well, I think we are ready to wrap up. We have had a great conversation. Thank you, Loudon, and thank you, Hannah, for sharing your stories. They're so important. Thank you, Roy, for sharing your story, as well as helping us understand the amazing possibilities should we be able to find ways to access them. So thank you for your time, everyone who's on this meeting. It's important that you are here. The gift that you have that's most important is your time, and you're spending it here. So thank you for that. And we look forward to what comes out of this event and what changes you can make in your community. So have a great day, everyone, and thank you so much.